questions to ask yourself before choosing your next camera. Buying a camera is a very easy option. You can go online, there's a variety of cameras you can buy. You can go add to cart, shop it now, buy it now, and there's cameras priced all the way from $500-ish, $450-ish pound, all the way up to $2,000-3,000 or pounds, depending on how much you want to spend. But in this episode, we're going to cover the main questions you need to ask yourself before you buy a camera, and it's going to actually help you understand the type of camera you want, because this is kind of flipping the question I always get: what's the best camera for me? So I'm going to ask you a series of questions. We're going to look at a certain amount of cameras during this journey and see what works well for you. If you have any questions or you're thinking about anything, drop it in chat and we can pick up later on as well. So the first question is going to be nice and easy. Why do you want to buy a camera? What's the main purpose of it? Are you planning to use it in a certain environment? Have you got a plan to do, like, I don't know, a wedding or something? Are you covering somebody's wedding for them and you're thinking about a camera? Do you take a lot of photos on your mobile phone and you're thinking you want to up your game and get something a bit more, well, professional maybe? So this is another common misconception kind of thing, where people will buy a professional looking camera to look like professional. So is that the right route to go down? What do I mean by that? Let's put you on a screen here. Let's have a look at a camera so you can see what I mean by this. So here's an example. I'm showing you a Panasonic camera. It looks like a DSLR. If you're totally new to photography, this would be like a decent camera as like a starting option. Would it work well? Is it a good option? Well, that kind of depends what you're going to use it for. So that's where we're looking at the first question. Why do you want to buy a camera? So let's put an example to this. Say, for example, I want to buy a camera because I want to take loads of product photos. I've got loads of little jewelry, watches. I'm not wearing a watch. The one time I talk about jewelry and I'm not wearing a watch, we need to sort that out right now. We cannot continue. And just as by magic, we have got the watch. So this watch has been with me for a while. I actually sold it and then brought it back. So it's one of those watches that have a status symbol attached to them. If you're not familiar with it, you should know what that is. Drop it in comments if you know what it is. So if you're taking photographs of jewelry or you want something a bit more interesting, then the product photography element of my scenario, that's my requirement. That's what I want it for. So I'm gonna take some photos of jewelry, some watches, some cufflinks, along those lines. So already there's an expectation there of what the job is of the camera. You may have a different one. You may want to get a camera for family photos, which is perfectly fine. So that's like one side of it. And now next is a question that's going to be interesting. When will you use your camera the most? When will you use a camera the most? So in my example, if I'm taking product photography, it'll be in a studio environment, which means I'll have great light, I'll have a desktop, I'll have a tripod, so the camera will be steady most of the time. So I won't really need to do handheld photos. So that's like an easy thing to think about. So in that example, what does that mean for me? Well, that means this camera may not be the best option for me. Firstly, because it's going to be a bridge camera. It's not going to give me the highest quality that I'm after. Does it take raw photographs? Do we need to worry about raw? That's going to be another question later on. We'll have a look at that as well. And looking at these now, this camera not specifically excellent, so let's update that and find a camera that is going to be a better option for my need. So now we're looking at more along the lines of where I would be. Actually, this is where I started with my product photography. Not exactly this camera, actually this camera. A model earlier than this camera is what I used, product photography, and I got a macro lens. We're going to go into more questions about this, so I'm giving you an idea so you know where we are. And what I'm showing is a Canon T7 in America, also known as a 2000D in the UK. There's a couple of names for this camera. Solid camera. It's like aimed at beginners. It's a DSLR camera, crop sensor camera, but it works well because you can change the lens on it and buy the right lens you want. Overall, good quality images, 24 megapixel sensor, and it's a APS-C sensor. So in many scenarios, it will do well for us. It shoots in RAW, which is like call it a negative of a photo. You got all the details there. So in my example, when will you use your camera the most? I will use a camera the most in a studio environment, taking photos of watches, for example. So that's my answer to that. What's your answer? Make sure to keep these questions in your head and answer them, so then it helps you find the right camera. How will you use your camera? So I will use my camera indoors most of the time. I'm going to use it on a tripod. I'm going to have some flashes to give me extra light. So in that example, I don't really need a camera that performs really well in low light or in high speed situations, because I'm going to be taking product photos, so they're going to be static, unless I was taking a photo of like something moving. I don't know, that's an option. But yeah, so that's like a nice option there. What will you use your pictures for? So we looked at the camera, but now this is determining the quality of the image. What will we use the pictures for? In my example, product photography, they're probably going to be used on an online blog. However, in the past, I used some to be printed and published on magazines. So if you're thinking of taking photographs, one good tip is take it in high quality to start off with, because you never know where you might need those images or how you can use them. So some of my images from early on, I took in JPEG, as in normal shooting mode, automatic JPEGs. And later on, I thought, you know what, if I'd taken that photograph in a RAW format, I could have gone back now with what I learned and how good I am now, looking back like 10, 15 plus year old images. I could make them better just by adjusting a few little things. And if I had a RAW photograph, I would have more capabilities to edit that, because the image has more detail in it as opposed to like a JPEG. If you're not familiar with the JPEG versus RAW format, I've done a whole series video about explaining the picture differences, so it might help you. But yeah, so now knowing what you're going to do, the photo will determine what resolution you're shooting at, what settings you're shooting at, what camera can shoot those photographs. Because ideally, if you're shooting for publishing, printing, you want a better camera that can control being printed out in a nice big size and still hold loads of detail. So that's an interesting option, especially if you're gonna go pro with this, because you can go pro with starter cameras. You don't need to have a professional mirrorless Sony a7 III or a Canon R6 to be really professional. You can use normal cameras, providing you know what you're doing and you learn the basics. So that's along the lines of, if you look so far, to recap, why do you want to buy a camera? When will you use the camera most? How will you use your camera? And what will you use your pictures for? So that's like 4 questions we've already asked. A couple more, and this is going to be more along the lines of where you're going with it. Do you want to edit or process the images after you've taken them? So a lot of people take photographs and they're as is. They're just taken. The photographs are taken and they use them. So like they'll upload them on social media, add some filters or whatever. But that's a different element of it. If you're taking photographs, do you download your photographs onto your computer, use Lightroom, Darktable, Raw Therapy, any of those programs to edit your photos yourself? Because what I tend to do, my workflow is I'll take photographs, I try and get them as best as I can in the camera so I don't have to spend time editing them. However, in some cases, if I need to edit them, I'll bring them into Lightroom, do a little bit of adjusting in like colors and sharpness and a little bit of just a bit of oomph to the photo to make it a bit more nice. And then I can export them, and I export them in a couple of sizes, like square for Instagram, YouTube thumbnail sizes, 1080p, so you can make that image a little bit smaller, keep the original and have those little copies of it so you can use it in different ways. The best thing is if you make the photographs and save them in different sizes, you're more likely to use those photos. If I show you an example of like thumbnails and photos, I'll show you that now. Okay, so I've brought up a picture here that I took on the camera, and I took a number of pictures and I exported them in different sizes. If I didn't have this photograph, I would not have used it as a thumbnail, but because I had it, I used it as a thumbnail. So how these work is, I will take a photograph, I'll save it in different sizes, and then I can use that in different ways. And you'll notice I'm wearing a different watch there, so I do like my watches. Oh, you missed it. I zoomed in too much, that one there. My triangular Men in Black watch. So there you'll see, just by having the photos there, I've got the ability to use them in different ways. If I didn't have the photos there and I didn't save them in different sizes, I would have had to go into Lightroom, find a photo, export it out, and there's an extra barrier there. So the easier you can make it for yourself to use the photographs you've taken, the more likely you are to use it. So I'll use that in like a blog. I've used it on Instagram. I've used it as a thumbnail on Amazon Live show, which is like doing quite well now because people are dropping in. So we're talking about cameras and questions. Again, I am live at the moment. So that's a couple of them covered. How about okay, this is something more that people won't think about. How big are your hands? Do you have small hands? Do you have big hands? Because what I mean by this, it's one of those. They say, you know what they say, you got big hands. Okay. What that means is there's two cameras here. Now, well, I'll show you and I'll explain it. So I've got a full frame camera that fits in my hand. I've got not big hands. I wear a medium size motorcycle glove. So medium, but cameras wise, how comfortable am I holding a camera that's a bigger size camera with medium hands? Okay, full frame Canon camera like a 60 will be fine. But then the same example, if I hold a smaller camera, look at that. It's like I can easily wrap my hands around the camera, hold it, I feel more comfortable with it. If you're a girl, if you're more petite, if you got smaller hands, then this is something worth thinking about. Have a look at the size of the cameras and think, you know what, am I better off with like a small camera? Hey, for our podcast listeners, I am holding up one of our little mini DSLR cameras, and they're designed for kids. So there's a number of different things. It's something basic, but if you hold your camera nicely and comfortably, you'll notice you'll use it more because it looks like it feels at home. Like mobile phones these days are getting really big. You have to like hold it with two hands and flip it out and stuff and all that nonsense. But yeah, if that's your thing, that's your thing. So size is very important. Picking a camera is not too difficult. I'm going to start looking at what you can actually buy. Let me give you an example. So if you were looking at a camera, there's a couple of things you can look at. First thing I'm going to say to you is the Canon T7 is a nice starter option for many people. Decent size, and an example what I've given you so far, it'll perform well in that example. It's a decent price, $450-ish. You get a camera, you get a lens. So you've got pretty much everything you need to start. It's a nice size. It's going to be comparable to like a nice medium camera. If you want something smaller, there's another option, which I would say is a lot more user-friendly for new people. I used it. I played with it. I liked it, but it was too geared towards noobs for my liking. It's like it was trying to tell me everything to do, but I know what I'm doing. So I was like, nah. You can turn off all the menus, but it still felt a bit like awkward. So the camera is a Canon M50 Mark II. Would I buy that camera? I bought it. You remember, I bought it and I tested it and checked it. What did I end up keeping? Because I've come from this type of camera infrastructure, kind of that size, then that works quite well. Not me. I've seen your question. Give me a second. I'll come over to you in a second. So like that size of camera, I prefer not too small, not too big. So the SL3 that I use for live streaming, the camera I record from, is what I like to use because it's like a mid-grind, not too small, not too big. I could put a smaller lens on there if I wanted to. It works well in most scenarios. So you can go down the Nikon route. Nikon do the D3500. You've got the Sony Alpha series, A6400s. Loads of great cameras out there. If you get similar cameras from a similar era, similar year of make, manufacturer won't matter unless you've already got Canon cameras, for example. So price, this is going to be important. How much do you want to spend? You'll notice I've come on to this a bit later on. This is like later down the line. The reason for that is if you can find the first points that we talked about and the questions we had, answers to those, price isn't a massive issue. You can find good cameras in a multitude of budgets, but I would say if you've got anything under $400, don't bother buying a DSLR camera. You're probably going to get better quality results with your mobile phone camera. Because a lot of the cameras that are designed to be point and shoot and like smaller cameras, you're not going to get a great deal of quality from them. You're better off saving a bit of money and getting a camera that actually gives you a noticeable difference by having a big enough sensor and the option to make it nice, basically photos in like a layman's term. So that is like an overview of cameras. Hopefully that helps you, but don't worry, I've got a whole playlist of videos here that are designed to compare loads of different cameras to each other. So check that out and I'll see you on that next video.